Okay, thank you. Brilliant. Yes, I can see too. Okay. Hi, everyone, and thanks for having me. My name is Gioia, Caminada. I am a trainer and facilitator with many years of experience in different areas, from change management to language acquisition and teaching, and other areas. I'm quite an eclectic professional, and I have a passion for systemic change and transformational change. And I have created a little system for transformational change, which is inspired by Paul Watzlawick, and that I am going to present about today. So my presentation is called The Rules of Transformative Change, a simple way to think about systemic change. I am first going to go through Paul Watzlawick's theory of transformational change, transformative change, and my body analogy, because I have made an analogy between his rules for change and our human dimension. And then I'm going to present a case study, the Escuela Nueva, Colombian case study. It's a new kind of school that's very popular in Colombia. And then I'll leave some space for your thoughts. So a little nudge about what's the difference between change and transformation, which I'm sure you all know way more than I do about, but I put it in the presentation anyway. So when we have simple change, something changes, but the system stays the same. Whereas with transformation, the whole system has changed and not one of its parts. Who was Paul Watzlawick? In case you don't know, probably many of you know him better than I do or know him very well. He was a family therapist, a psychologist, a communication theorist, a philosopher, and one of the most influential members of the Mental Research Institute of Palo Alto, where he practiced as family therapist. He was also a professor of philosophy and communication theory at Stanford. He, whilst working as a family therapist, he came up with 4 rules for transformative change with his colleagues, which they came up with through an action learning process of working with clients in their studio. The first tenet for creating transformation is change your solution and the way you act towards your problem. So Paul Watzlawick believed that the way we act towards our problems often contributes to them. So we worry about something, we do something about it, and sometimes we make it worse. Quite common in myself and many people I know. And this is what they call the body of change. So he starts with talking about acting. So we act, we move, and this is what they call the body of change, human dimension of doing and body. The second tenet is accept paradox, because transformation is somewhat illogical. So when we are going through a process of transformation, there is something quizzical, illogical, that doesn't make sense, that goes on, that almost feels like it's not going to lead us anywhere, but actually it then leads us to transformation. And this is what I call the heart of change. So related to feelings and illogical aspects of our personalities and the organizations we work with and the systems we are part of. The third tenet is, if you want to transform a situation, ask yourself, what can I do now, and not why am I here? So do not focus on the root of the problem, but be here now. And this is what I call the spirit of change, because it's the most mindful aspect, if we want, of his theory. Be here now, what can I do? Not why am I here, because I'm here. So what can I do now to change this? The fourth tenet is change your perspective. So look at your situation from another point of view, which is what I call the mind of change. He also talks about reframing, so using the participant's language in order to create change, using the client's language, reframe the situation in a way that the person you are working with can understand, because it relates to their own world. And then last but not least, he proposes that everything is connected. So transformation is a holistic process. We have talked about the body of change, the head of change, the spirit of change, the heart of change. These are all part of a continuum, of an holistic process They don't necessarily arrive in that order. Sometimes we go back and forth in our circle of change, let's say, and they all feed into each other. Interestingly, in his tenets, in his rules, acting comes first. People, and including myself, often analyze a problem before trying to solve it, but the way he proposes his steps towards transformational change, acting comes first, and actually changing our perspective, our mind comes last, which I find quite interesting. These rules, he worked as a family therapist, but also as a communication theorist, and his rules apply to system thinking, to organizational change, and to change in different, not only personal change, but also social change, if we want. So I'm going to illustrate now a little case study of the Escuela Nueva, which is a schooling system developed in Colombia in the 70s, and I'm going to go through these rules of change and apply those to the case study. What is Escuela Nueva? Escuela Nueva is a schooling system that was first adopted in the 70s in Colombia and adopted a bit more widely during the 80s, and was very successful in raising literacy levels and other aspects of educational aspects, extracurricular educational aspects, such as confidence, self-esteem, and the ability to reflect on learning. And it was based on a few tenets. It was classes were mixed, so the children had different ages. It was used in rural settings. It was student-led, and the teacher is a facilitator of learning. And it's widely used in rural Colombia. So what happened when it first got adopted was that in many rural localities in Colombia, the schools were small and there were many teachers. So classes were already multi-generational, but the teaching methods used were traditional. So the teacher would give away the knowledge and the children would work on what the teacher was proposing. Whereas this method puts the students at the center. Now I'll explain a little bit more how. So the first tenet of change, according to Paul Watzlawick, is we start by doing and modifying our previous solutions. So Colombia's rural schools already had multi-generational classes, but Escuela Nueva changes the pedagogical approach, as I have just said. So the lessons are based on themes that students live in their daily life. Parents are also involved. Students work together in groups, and the teacher facilitates their learning and takes their input as a central point for their teaching. Second tenet of transformation, we pay special attention to feelings and paradoxes. The research process behind the Escuela Nueva, this method, is participatory. Escuela Nueva puts students and their interests at the center. So, for example, many children would work in the fields with their parents. So mathematical problems would involve crops or cows or situations that children had to deal every day. And the method also makes the most out of a teaching approach born out of scarcity, which is multi-generational classes. So traditionally, it's not great to have children with with different ages in the same class and different literacy levels in the same class. But the method makes the most of it. So children help each other. Someone maybe knows more about one topic, the other one knows more about another topic. And in this way, the situation works better, way more efficiently for all the students involved. Third tenet of transformation, according to Paul Watzlawick, is we create tools and practical solutions. So we are here now. How do we make these multi-generational classes work? And how do we do it in a way that's cost effective? There's training for teachers, there's tools that the teachers can use, and they are open-ended. So they have a curriculum and teaching resources that are used by everyone, but they can be adapted to the settings that the teachers are working in. Yes, and cabinet members are teachers and experts. A little step back, how was this method applied so widely in Colombia? Because the Ministry of Education, who had a background in sociology and educational studies, and had also worked in a similar kind of schools herself, she establishes this method through participatory research, and then also creates a cabinet member, Ministry of Education, which includes experts in participatory education and expert teachers. So it's a very practical way of thinking about this new method. Fourth point, brain, we elevate our perspective and transform a situation. Multi-generational classes go from forced and ineffective to effective and empowering. They expand throughout Colombia and also internationally. Another point that Paul Watzlawick was very keen on is to use the stakeholders language. So school activities focus on students' daily lives and interests, and cabinet members are teachers and expert educators. So they speak the language spoken by other teachers in rural settings, families, communities, children. And therefore children learn a bit better because they're not studying abstract topics, but situations that they have themselves experienced. We recognize that everything is connected. School achievement is connected to student well-being. So by taking into account the lived experience of children, children are more involved in their learning and they learn better. And we put people at the center of all stages of project delivery, from the designing of the teaching methods, to the design of training, to the delivery of school education, and so on. One question, Escuela Nueva, how to expand further. So Escuela Nueva expanded quite a lot in Colombia during the 80s. And then Colbert lost her ministry. It is still used, but it could have been expanded further. One question I have is, what about the bureaucrats' language? So her ministry, her cabinet was composed of expert teachers and educators, but who were very successful in promoting this method because it was actually used widely. But what about the bureaucrats' language? Would have it been, would it have expanded further if professional politicians had been involved? It might have been detrimental, we don't know. But that's one question. The method did expand in Colombia, and after I think in the 2000, Vicky Colbert created a social enterprise, which is now taking the method in other world countries. Also a success. So the method did expand. Anyway, okay, thank you. If you have any questions or thoughts, I'll be more than happy to listen and try to answer if I can.
Did you show the, I think it was the second slide where you talked about his 3 or 4 different ingredients or approaches?
Yes. Yes. Okay. So the 4 aspects of transformational change. Yeah.
Yes.
I'm not sure I have them all in the same slide, I'm afraid. Oh, actually, okay. I do. Because there's the one with the image. Yeah, this one. No. Sorry, I'm going. It's a bit earlier. Yeah. So the spirit, the head, the heart, and the body. I mean, yeah, that's the only slide where I have all of the 4.
Yeah, it was the what can I do here now?
Yeah.
So those 3, that's it. Change your perspective. Okay. Yeah. And then 2. Yeah. Nice.
Yeah, I like this paradox.
I love that one. Yeah. I'm working a lot with that. Yeah. Yeah.
And then when the first.
Change the way you act to your problem. That's beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I do find it rather fascinating, to be honest. And also the fact that the acting comes first, and then there's the feelings, and then only after you kind of you use your whole intuition rather than just your thinking mind.
Yeah.
To work.
It's really nice.
Through a problem.
I had never heard of him. This is all new to me.
Okay. Yeah. I kind of came across him by chance because there's one author. I'm Italian, and there is this author who is a very she's an expert in participatory planning called Marianella Sclavi, and she writes about active listening and emotional awareness.
Mm-hmm.
And she has these 7 rules of active listening. But what she like the two kinds of change she talks about in her work, there's change 1 and change 2, so simple change and transformational change. She takes from this author, so from Paul Watzlawick, and she works a lot on theories that from Gregory Bateson is her main the scholar she refers to. And then there's this note when she talks a lot about change 1 and change 2, and then there is this note, the decision is taken from this work. And then I read the whole book because I thought I wanted to learn a bit more about it.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Just show number 4 for me so I can just grab that. So sorry.
That's okay.
Somebody else will ask a question in a minute. Change your perspective. Of course it is. Of course it is. Yeah. Thank you.
No worries. Yeah.
I have a question. First of all, grazie, Joya. That was really interesting.
Thank you.
And I like the simplicity, and I can see how that feeds through slightly from psychological, sort of psychotherapy practice, if you know what I mean. I'm quite enjoying that elegant method, which is quite nice, and a different way of looking at it. My question was particularly around the educational achievements, I suppose.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that it had a particularly good effect on literacy. Yeah, you said that was one way of judging that there was a success there. I'd be interested to hear a little more granular detail about what they succeeded at, and even if things that didn't work as well, from that type of approach, and then relevant, especially where it's relevant to change or transformation and working with what you've got,
Yeah. Okay. So, I don't have the statistics at hand, but
no, that's okay. Anecdotal is fine.
Yeah. So what the case studies I read were saying was that the literacy attainment was higher than what happened with the previous methods. And I don't remember if it was only literacy or if they mentioned also math. There was evaluation carried out on the new method. So, but generally there was higher academic achievement in the children, and then they did some research on other aspects such as confidence and levels of attention, and that was also higher.
Yeah.
And and then what it said was that the costs was slightly higher than formal teacher training, so about 5 to 10% higher.
Yeah.
The return on investment was much higher because they also reduced quite a lot the dropout rates. Yeah. So there was loads. There still is, I guess, quite a high dropout rate also because many of these schools in rural Colombia are maybe in one village, but then children have to travel to that village. So it's quite easy to not go to school anymore because you have to walk for 1 hour to go to school. That sort of thing.
It's quite a barrier, isn't it?
Yeah. So what they read was that the academic achievement was higher, the dropout was lower, the cost was slightly higher, but not excessively higher. And it was a method that had been used in Colombia before, but mainly in wealthy schools with wealthy pupils. And not in that kind of environments. One way in which it could have worked better, I think towards the end of the 80s, I think the government changed, and then it was a bit like it was implemented in a wide number of schools, but it was difficult sometimes it wasn't widely implemented because of bureaucracy and red tape and government changing, and then there was some UN funding that was there until a certain point, and then it wasn't there anymore. So and Vicky Colbert, who was the minister, also lost her seat. So at that stage, I guess it lost momentum because she wasn't
it's
there
very,
anymore.
very hard to make radical changes in any large educational system.
Yes,
Very, very hard.
And I think it is quite impressive that nevertheless they managed to use it so widely in an environment that was not easy at all. I mean, not
Definitely.
very many resources and very fragmented. And I guess another pitfall was that in some departments, officially they were using that method, but then in practice, perhaps the methods were used anyway.
I was going to say, I'd be really interested to know how they were able to make sure that the teachers were, what's the word I'm looking for? Well, we don't have it in the same way in English, do we? We talk about it I know in French and Italian, you talk about the difference between education and formation. But when you're talking about teacher training, when they are actually skilled enough to do it this way, whilst also being open to learning about what they're doing, you know what I mean? And actually rolling that out to some coherent, consistent level, it's probably very, very hard.
I mean, I agree. I do. I think so. Although one thing that I found of interest is that I think cooperative learning, which is quite similar, so it's based on group learning where one child perhaps has the task of analyzing, another one has the task of reporting, and another one has the task of writing. I mean, they give children different tasks. That was also invented by a teacher, I think in Ireland, in a moment where schools were very underfunded. So they are methods that make the most out of scarcity. Because, I mean, if you have very rich schools where all students are very well prepared, probably teachers wouldn't have thought about it as much because there was no need or very little need.
It's interesting, isn't it, that it was a response to a specific problem, which actually kind of got better results than expected, if you like, you know, and that succeeded more. It wasn't, you know, from a specific problem. Interesting. Yeah. Thanks, Joya.
Thank you. Can I phrase a question, please, on behalf of Kong Ha Ma, who's based in Malaysia and actually, I have to say, getting incredible kudos from me for actually being up at 2 a.m. to join this. Astonishing. Kong Ha Ma asks a question to you, Joya, about how could this approach be adapted for learning more abstract topics? Is there a way that you can kind of use this and adapt it
to teach abstract topics? Okay, I mean the teaching approach, I guess, like, I mean, I don't know the very, like, the nitty-gritty, the specifics of this approach, and it was used in primary schools. So I think the level of abstraction there wouldn't have been like very high because you're teaching children who range from 6 to 10, maybe 11. But with cooperative learning, which is another student-centered method, you can work on any topic. I mean, you could even work on a philosophy text and ask philosophical questions to the children. Or give them a case study or a story, and then let them develop their responses or think about an ethical problem. I mean, in this case, I guess it had to be practical because the children are young and they have very practical problems. They have to work. They often, not all of them, but they live in overcrowded housing, for example. I mean, you want to solve their main problems first, rather than that's the first port of call. But
there's a kind of slightly Maslow sort of thing about survival and basic needs and exploring the education around those before you can go up a level, I guess.
And motivating also children to learn, like what can I do with this if I can use it also at home.
Okay.
Then it's better, or if I can link it to what I do every day. Otherwise, if I'm just learning about, I don't know, a princess in Norway, what can I do with this? So, or for example, one thing they were doing, the teachers, was every year they would build a map with the students so that they would know where every student lived and how long it took them to go to school. So you learn geography by looking at your map and knowing where this other person lives. Yeah, but cooperative learning and other participatory learning methods can be used at any level of abstraction, I think, depending on the needs of the students.
Okay.
And what you want to teach them, by diversifying the task and giving different roles to students in a group so that they don't step on each other's feet and work together to solve a problem. That problem can be philosophical. You can give pre-reading to students to do before you do your session, and then every person, for example, illustrates an argument, let's say. Yeah. Yeah. And they have to debate that. So it can be very abstract if needs be.
Any other people who'd like to ask a question? I've got one more, but I'll step back for a second.
I have a question, if you can hear me.
Yes.
I think I've started writing it up, but I can say it. I think any new perspective, as Aidan and others have said, any new perspective I think is great, because it's very easy to get stuck in your favorite model. We've all had that experience, and any new way of looking at things is good. I was going to mention, I don't know if you're aware of the work of Gareth Morgan, who wrote a very good book on imagination, where he talked about the need to have alternative metaphors when you look at organizations, and not to get stuck in your own particular metaphor. And he wrote a very good book on that, which people in the systems thinking world, I think, are using. And having a new perspective is always very good. The question I was going to ask Joya was, I'm not clear how you use that perspective, or how that perspective you mentioned was actually used in the case study. Were you looking at it afterwards, or was it used by the staff themselves, or are you just reflecting on what they might have used in their particular activity? Could you clarify that for me, please?
Okay, thank you for the question. Yes. Okay, no. So I actually hadn't thought about this. No, the practitioners didn't use the method. What I did, I read the book, I studied the book, I thought about the theory in many ways, and then I found different examples that work, like the dynamic of change. And and I applied. I mean, like, it can be applied to loads of situations where transformation happens. And then I found this case study of systems changing, and I thought that's really interesting. And I tried to apply the method on the case study. So the practitioners didn't work following this methodology at all. I mean, they started they knew that the similar methods were used in some schools. They studied the rural settings in Colombia where they wanted to apply it in, and then they developed this method and they implemented it. But they weren't following a pathway for transformational change or Paul Watzlawick. That's my, that's how I used the four tenets, and then I applied them to the case study.
Yes, you just reflecting on what happened, you thought your method would be appropriate way of understanding what actually happened, rather than actually using it themselves. That's fine. That's quite a useful way of thinking of things. Quite often, in the viable system model, which a lot of people here are experienced in, quite often you find situations where you look at what actually happened, or it didn't happen in an organization, and you apply the viable system model to make sense of what was going on, and you find it quite a useful way of gaining insight into a situation that otherwise doesn't make sense to anybody. So I think it's a sensible way of doing things. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. I had a question, Joya, just about, is there a good place to go and read a little bit more about the Escuela Nueva itself and how it worked? Is there like a paper or something?
Yes, I mean, there are quite a few papers. I'll stop sharing for a second, and I can maybe send you a few links.
Thank you. That would be good. I can add them to the session information if you do that.
Yeah. Okay. Shall I send them to you later, maybe, rather than now?
Yes, please.
Because they would, yeah. But there is one specific paper that I used for this presentation. But if one Googles Escuela Nueva Colombia, there's quite a few papers online that one can access, which are quite interesting as well. But I'll send you everything. Yes.
Thank you. That would be really great. I had a question just about the method. Obviously, because there's the idea that one begins with act and acting. How did is there a sort of a learning process built with? So if I act, am I then learning from the action and then reflecting it back to next action? How does that work in this particular approach?
Yes. Okay. So what I use in my practice in my life is a wheel of learning. So the wheel of learning has 4 tenets, and it's act, feel, be, and think. And the idea is that sometimes you don't necessarily start by acting. Sometimes you start by a sensation you have. Sometimes you start by thinking about what you're doing. And sometimes you start by doing something. So it's not necessarily in that order. It's a wheel. So, and it's a circular process, and it doesn't necessarily, like, sometimes you act a little bit and then you think, and then it's not rocket science, like it's not prescriptive, but it's 4 dimensions that I think are crucial part of learning, which is crucial part of change. Yeah. At the same time, I quite like the fact that the first thing that Paul Watzlawick, thought about when he thought about transformative change was that we need to act on our solutions. So, in a personal problem or situation that we want to change, it's quite nice to think about what I'm doing and how can I do it differently. And even like sometimes if I have a problem or a person has a problem, like the attitude is being worried, or like not thinking really straight and just doing stuff because you want to change the situation. And I think that this usually doesn't help. So even just changing the way one breathes or considers a situation, like if the problem is persistent, instead of rolling my eyes, I try to kind of see it or leave it and inhabit the situation as if I am in a learning situation that I am quite happy to experience because I learn something from it. So even the attitude is quite important in a personal situation, but even in a work situation, or like, what can I learn from this? And that already helps me to move in a bit of a different way or react to things in a different way. So it's the whole of myself, but acting is quite central. It's not just thinking about what I can do, or not starting from the analysis necessarily. Or I mean, in this case, and in this case, I think they start from a participatory research experience where they interview students and teachers. So I mean, they have their ideas. No one comes to a situation with 0 ideas, tabula rasa, we say in Italian. You don't do that, but you start by listening. You start by going into the community you're in. You don't necessarily have a point to prove. Like, you listen first and you see where that research or active listening takes you.
Okay, thank you. I particularly like the inclusion of feel into that, because so many sort of problem solving cycles don't involve a feel part at all. They are sort of all sort of logic and planning and all the rest of it. And this feels very different, which is actually very refreshing.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think it's so important what someone feels when they're learning or when they're going through change, because it is an emotional process always. So that to take those out, I think is kind of, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Although I know that a lot of time we kind of try to think coldly about something. I don't know. I don't think in my experience it doesn't work. In my own experience, because I can't ignore what I am feeling or what other people are feeling while we do something or change something. I think if you ignore it, it probably, I don't know, sometimes it gets worse or it becomes a force that can be difficult to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Can we take one last question? Just conscious of time, we're running towards the end. Is there anyone with a last question for Gioia? Wow, I think you've filled our brains. There's a lot of stuff going on in the chat, by the way, which we'll incorporate. Kong Hamar has added some additional thoughts, and we're continuing our discussion to Sir with Love, which was a film with an interesting parallel.
Aidan put a tentative finger up. I'm not saying where he put it up into, but
I was going to ask Joya.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a bit more? Because this is completely selfish. I've got a total interest in linguistics, languages, and language acquisition and development as well.
Yeah.
I'd love you to say anything you think particularly relevant in that area about language acquisition specifically.
In the area of change, you mean?
It's just relevant to anything that you've said today.
Okay. Well, I mean, okay. So, okay, I do Italian teaching. No, I mean, not all the time. I've taught Italian a lot, and I've studied linguistics and language acquisition a lot. I mean, it's two fields they kind of tend to keep separate. But for example, Paul Watzlawick, so the author I'm drawing this theory from, also has a book that's called The Language of Change. So he postulates, because change is relational, it happens a lot through what we say to one another and how we say to one another. I mean, the book is quite old, so he talks a lot also about hypnosis. I mean, some stuff is really interesting, some stuff, I mean, it's interesting, but I'm not sure if we would apply. But I do think that the way we talk and the way we frame a problem is quite important and can make a lot of difference, or the way also we say things. I mean, for example, there's some research that says that if I tell you don't forget this, you're likely to forget something. Whereas if I say remember this, it's way more effective. Or if I say, oh, I should do this, I probably won't do it. But if I start saying I want to do this, then I'm way more likely to do it. Unless I don't want to, and then I don't say anything because I don't want to. So I should do this, but I'm not going to do it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then what Paul Watzlawick was saying also, use the language of your client or the person you're working with. So frame the situation in a way that it makes sense to them. So it's also about motivating the people you're working with towards change. Like, why would it make sense to them? Or I mean, maybe if you're proposing a process that's not very usual for them, is it similar in any way to what they're already doing? Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah.
Thank you.
I like that bit as well. Use their language, use their terms, help them. It's quite patronizing actually if you don't do that, isn't it? Really, and it just so I like that a lot.
Thank you. Yeah, and also, I mean, also sometimes people don't necessarily understand you because you think that what you're saying they've also experienced, but they haven't necessarily. Because why?
Okay, thank you for everyone's questions. We've come towards pretty much the end of our time. And Joya, thank you so much for joining us and introducing us to this, because this feels completely new for me. I didn't know anything about this.
Okay.
And it was fascinating and different and refreshing, I think. It's so easy for us to get stuck in analysis and models, whereas actually this sort of takes you right into the heart of ACT. And I think that's really interesting and important. So, Joya, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Can I just say one small thing?
Yes, of course.
I am happy to give out a couple of sessions if someone wants to send me a case study and you want to work, for free, to work with me and use this framework and think about that case study. I'm happy to do 2 sessions, like 2 hours in total, and look at it with you. I'm really happy to do that because it helps me learn more as well. So do send me an email.